Hello, Bo, and welcome to DNV's Spotlight on Shipping series. As many of you will know, my guest today is Mr. Bo Cerup-Simonsen, the CEO of Mærsk Mc-Kinney Møller Center for Zero Carbon Shipping. And the point of today's conversation is to shed a light on some of the most important topics influencing the shipping industry's decarbonization agenda, and to learn a bit more about Mærsk Mc-Kinney Møller Center for Zero Carbon Shipping and how the center will support the industry to decarbonize. So, Bo, warmly welcome. Great to have you. Let us, get straight into the questions. And you are more or less 1 year into operations now as the CEO of the Mærsk Mc-Kinney Møller Center for Zero Carbon Shipping. Could you talk a little bit about the center's mission and how you collaborate with industry on projects, please?
Thank you very much, Knut, and thank you for inviting me into this forum. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. So the Mærsk Mc-Kinney Møller Center for Zero Carbon Shipping was established as a new player in an ecosystem. It was established by the A.P. Møller Foundation as an attempt to help the ecosystem innovate, identify the necessary solutions and create the necessary solutions. So it's established as an independent, first of all, so we are not a part of Mærsk. We are completely outside by governance and by everything, despite our name. But that's actually one of my key jobs, is to make sure that we are and remain completely independent. And then secondly, I'd say also that we're established to become a collaboration platform. So our biggest aim is really to become an effective and very professional platform for collaboration, where leading companies and leading countries, leading organizations and people in general can come to help strategize, to help figure out what are those possible pathways of the future. And then, of course, also to go into then creating the solutions that will eventually enable this solution to play out. So that's really how we're set up.
That's very interesting. And I must say that I think you've gotten off to a very good start, Bo. And I see that there are many interested parties or partners signed up already. And, how will you ensure that this center is just not another club for talk and where limited content is produced? And can you point to any sort of particular promising research which is happening right now and could soon be translated into some practical solutions for emissions abatement?
I mean, creating a real powerhouse, you can say, is of course about a lot of different things. But I would say one of the things that we are doing here is that we have employed a number of engineers and economists that are used to creating solutions in industry. So we are a group of 50 people now, and we'll soon be 100 people. We are co-located in a good location here in the center of Copenhagen. And the fact that we have all these different disciplines, from finance, business, regulatory, energy, technology, ship design, across located in the same place. And these guys, together with me, are given the task of figuring out how is it possible to decarbonize and what are the development gaps that we need to work on. I think that's a really good starting point. And I think we're starting to see the fruits of that now, that we are not, going into the basement to make very theoretical research for ages. We are bringing things out in the open to discuss. And I think that's really who we want to be and where we want to be. We want to bring things out, because only when you bring things out, you can get perspectives from different sides, and you can start to talk about how do we take the next little step. And I think this is how we've gotten off to a good start, as you mentioned, is that we've gotten 25 very strong partners on board in this. We've done the strategizing and the analysis together. So we've just launched what we call the industry transition strategy. It's not perfect, I think, but it's pretty good. And it's definitely good enough to start talking about, okay, so what is the portfolio of projects and solutions that we now need to help get going in order to get the standards in place, in order to get the guidelines in place, in order to get the real solutions in place. So I think, Knut, that's how we're trying to become. I think we need to be also a think tank in order to understand the bigger picture, but we'd like to think of us, first of all, as a do tank, a place where we actually crank out solutions together with our partners.
Great stuff, Bo. And, you said it's not perfect, but let's not make perfect the enemy of good, right? So, research into zero carbon technologies is an imperative for our industry, and collaboration is going to fuel this transition. But if I could just, in practical terms, how will the results that you produce from the center with your partners, how will that, or will it be shared with the industry at large, please?
It will, and I can give you a few examples of this. So when I say a professional collaboration platform, it of course means that we need to have a space where we can, have a safe space for exchanging ideas and creating, new knowledge. But we also need to be mindful of the fact that all companies, they have proprietary knowledge and they have a business interest. So when eventually this market comes, they are all going to compete to get the market. So we are very much aware of that. So we work in what we call the pre-competitive phase and space to simply get an understanding of concepts and solutions. And right now, for example, we've developed a tool we call Navigate. It's a tool where you can assess the different energy pathways, and assess how you can turn with different energy pathways into a fuel, and then you can use this fuel on board different ship segments. It's been an enormous piece of work to get that done, and we're basically opening that up for the world around us now so that people can get insight into the data, they can play around with the data, and they can basically develop their own scenarios. So you can take, solar energy from the Middle East, turn it into hydrogen, turn it into nitrogen, transport it to the coast, take it on board in a medium-sized bulk carrier, and see how different scenarios will affect the cost of running your ship. So it's a way of really bringing this out, and our dream, of course, with this is not to provide a solution, but basically to provide a platform for an informed dialogue and discussion and eventually collaboration with the ecosystem. That's the idea.
I think that's a great idea, Bo. And, I think personally that, the true fuel of the future is collaboration, and certainly your center and the people working on it and your partners will, contribute significantly to that.
Sorry, Knut, but I would like to say to that I and we have been inspired also by the great work of DME in this case. And I think it's also an example where you have, for much longer than us, produced really top quality research work. And we're not trying to duplicate that, but we're trying to put some new stuff into the ecosystem. And some way or the other, I think this will resonate with each other, and it will create new insights and new confidence that it is actually possible to decarbonize the shipping industry.
Thanks for that. And I think this is really, one of the examples of a maritime renaissance that we are seeing, being now put into play. And, there are also other, say, centers or hubs working on this. And one is the newly established Singapore-based Global Center for Maritime Decarbonisation. And as you know, we are one of the sponsors behind that center. But will you and your center be interested in collaborating or even working together with this center? And how could we, put this into practice? That is I think that would be fantastic. We would get a tremendous leverage if you're able to do that, Bo.
And this, I can assure you, is very much on our agenda. And I met with Professor Lin Lu, the CEO of the center, last week to talk about exactly that. So we've started the planning, and I think also right from the outset, it's quite clear that we are quite complementary in our strategies and our ways of working and so on. So I'm really confident that this can play out very, very well. It's so important to remember here that this is not a competition. It's like safety. We're not competing on safety. We are competing against the status quo, basically. That's our competitor. And there's so much work to be done here in order to really outcompete status quo. So let's not think about this as a zero-sum game. There's really so much to be done. And I think we are all pulling in the same direction, DNV, a lot of other companies, and now this global center in Singapore. So we can do very well together. And global center in Singapore, a global maritime forum, getting to zero coalition, and a number of other of these are doing really good jobs. And I mean, we would like to just open up what we are doing so that we can somehow coordinate. There'll always be a lot of overlap, but we will also inspire each other and learn from each other. So I think that's the mindset we need to have.
Certainly, I think that's a great mindset to have, and it's not a race. I mean, it's not about winners and losers. It's really about bringing the shipping industry forward. Mm-hmm. We will have to talk a little bit about shipboard technologies, and you and I, we both know that methanol and ammonia as fuel options are either already available or will become available, say, in the next few years as a shipboard technology. However, the production of these green variants or the green variants of these fuels are very limited. So is it realistic to think that green methanol and green ammonia will be viable fuel options over the course of this or even the next decade? And what's your view on that, Bo?
I think they will be. I think they will both be viable, and they will both be a part of the mix. The question is how fast it will scale, and how these different competing fuels will scale compared to each other. And we are really not trying to predict that. We are trying to understand what are the fuels that have a potential in there. Are they material potentially in scale? So can they really move the needle? And if they can, then we will do our best to support that they are enabled. But there's so many things in that market in the future deciding which fuels are going to get which volume. So this is not really in our scope to try and predict that. But I think you mentioned two of them, and they are certainly viable fuels. Methanol is it can be applied immediately, but the scale is still very limited for the green methanol. But we know that there are many activities on the way now to get that going, so this will come for sure. We all know about the Mærsk example as one example, but there are more examples, and there are ships running already today on methanol, as we know. Ammonia, I think for sure also, and again, ammonia technologies need to be mature to a level where we can maintain the high safety levels of shipping that shipping has reached. So there's work to be done there. But the supply of green ammonia, I think, will also happen with high confidence. And it's not driven by shipping. It's driven by other developments like national or regional energy security demand. So it's driven by a macro picture that shipping is not even governing. So I think that is happening. And then shipping can tap into that energy supply. So I think both that you mentioned they are coming. They are coming in this decade, and we have to work to make sure that they scale by 2030, because that will really be needed. I mean, scale is a big issue here. How do we get, if 5% of shipping fuel demand is something like 40 million tons of ammonia, and the amount of solar and wind needed to develop that is enormous. So I think the scaling issue is really the one to watch here.
Totally agree, and I think this is also where we have to maybe look beyond the shipping industry as a community by itself and look to further upstream. Who are the suppliers? What are the sort of governmental funding that will be made available in the different geographies, etc.? Because after all, we need, as a consumer of fuel in shipping, we need large volumes of these green fuels, and the pace certainly has to be sped up if we are to have those volumes available. So maybe that is also something to think about when we are moving forward on some of these collaboration projects. How do we engage further upstream to sort of make that happen? But I would like now, as we are more or less already into the COP26 climate conference in Glasgow, and it's a sort of a shame to miss out having a couple of reflections around that. In my view, I mean, it seems like the political pressure to tackle climate change is really building since the IPCC report, but certainly also now after the start of the conference. How do you envisage the regulatory and the commercial landscape evolving as regional regulators, financiers, and charters all challenge the IMO to increase the speed and the ambition of the greenhouse gas strategy? What's your take on that, Bo?
I think I fully agree with what you said about momentum building. There's no doubt that momentum is building amongst nations to also, I mean, first of all, of course, to set decarbonization targets for all nations, and this is progressing very well, as we know, but also increasingly to look to international transport with aviation and shipping. So it's coming very strongly onto the member states' mindsets and agendas. They will bring this to COP26, and we know there'll be a lot of interest in COP26 to start putting pressure, mandating IMO to move forward. That momentum is building. There's also a lot of hesitance still to move forward in IMO. We also know that. So it's a kind of a power balance as usual, right? But there are very strong forces, and they are and the forces are increasing in size to really get going concretely, to get the target in IMO to become 0 in 2050 instead of 50% in 2050. To start talking about the intermediate goals of 2030 and 2040, to push further the energy efficiency regulation, and of course, at the end of the day, to also push the adoption of green fuels by some measure, probably a combination of market-based measure and technical regulation. So there is a lot of momentum building, and then at the same time, we know that big regions and countries like the US, like EU, like also now in Asia, we see from various pieces also putting pressure on IMO to move forward. I think, and I hope that when we get to IMO in the fall, and certainly next year, and certainly when we get to the 2023 review, we will actually be in a situation where we can start to see real regulation shaping up. So, Knut, that's a very short answer to a very complicated question. But I mean, do you see the same tendencies and pressure building up?
Yeah, I think that's pretty evident. I mean, the political pressure, the pressure from the younger generations. I mean, there is, if you want to stay, in a majority position as politicians in the next, several years, you have to really pick up on the green agenda. My ambition is really that we will be able to turn talk into some pragmatic, practical steps that will not be perfect, but they will help us along the way. And I'm quite, say, encouraged by the fact that we already see shipping taking steps to use alternative fuels, and the fact that it's doubled from last year to this year when it comes to new building orders with alternative fuels, I think is a very good sign. And then you and I working more on the, say, the research, the piloting, and not least on the safety aspects. Certainly need to, stay abreast with everything that happens and hopefully provide our best advice to the industry and to the regulators.
I think, Knut, there's also one important aspect about the regulatory, because in many times in our career in shipping, it has been like regulators putting forth something and then the industry needs to catch up. I think in this case we are seeing first movers actually stepping way ahead of regulation, and hopefully we will see a lot of that in the very short term. We're beginning to see examples of that, and I think we'll see quite a lot of that. And our hope is that these first movers will start to demonstrate that it is possible to do it, both technically and commercially, with known implications, so that we can use this experience to inform and inspire the processes in the regulatory system as well. So in this case, I think that dynamics is going to be very strong, and it has to be, because we need to do it on a timeline which is so short, almost like we haven't done ever before, at least not with something as complex as this. So it's very important that we also support the first movers in getting going and demonstrating that it is possible.
Exactly. Piloting is so important, and it's really important to get going and gain the experience, as you say. So I perfectly agree with that. Bo, it was a pleasure to have you on this Spotlight on Shipping series, and I will naturally be looking forward to visiting your center in Copenhagen at the first opportunity as well. And in the meantime, stay safe, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Knut, and you are always welcome here in Copenhagen. Looking forward to seeing you here. Thank you.